Hello, everybody. It's Phil Jacobus. It's August 31st. I'm here at my home in Woodstock. I'm on vacation, so forgive the casual attire. Um, Today, I'm going to play an interview that I recorded in my office last week with Hubert Zajicek. Dr. Zajicek is in charge of Dallas, or the medical portion of Dallas Health Week, I believe it's called. It's a very interesting story. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. But before we go to the interview with Dr. Zajicek, let's talk about a couple of interesting stories that are in our healthcare business news online this week or today. One story that I think is very interesting is how robotic surgery is helping to provide better outcomes for certain throat operations. It's a worthwhile read. Another story, which I think is really right square in the .med wheelhouse, is how are OEMs, how are companies dealing with service during the coronavirus, service on diagnostic imaging equipment and other equipment. That's also a worthwhile read and right in the wheelhouse of healthcare business news. So thanks very much for joining us. I'm off to do yard work for Barbara, planning some things or trimming. So enjoy the interview with Dr. Zajicek, and thank you for joining me. Hello, and thank you very much for joining me. Today I'm joined by Hubert Zajicek, who is the CEO and co-founder of Health Wildcatters. They're an accelerator for entrepreneur business based in Dallas, Texas. Hubert, thank you for joining us.
Well, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
And, Dr. Zajicek is both a physician and also holds an MBA. And we're going to talk a little bit today about his accelerator startup business, but also Health Week, which is starting today in Dallas. For those not familiar with the concept of an accelerator, Dr. Zajicek, would you just from 5,000 feet in the air tell us about that?
Sure, well, we can go then. Health Wildcatters is a healthcare seed accelerator, and what that means is we take on super early stage healthcare startups, and there's a call for applications to apply to our accelerator, and we pick the 10 best startups from really anywhere, mostly in the US, but also some international applications. And they join us here. We make a cash investment in them, but we're also, what's more valuable is they join us for our program, which is full of people who have been successful in healthcare, and also the programming throughout. So we basically spend 3 months with them, and if we do our work right, then we should accelerate that pathway to where they need to go with our program.
And if I'm not mistaken, some of the companies that you've worked with, some of the startups that you worked with ended up going public on the NASDAQ, is that right?
Yeah, so I have to use singular here because we just had our first. But a company by the name of Lantern Pharma just had a NASDAQ IPO in June and is doing well. And it's a pharma AI company that went through our accelerator several years ago. So pretty exciting.
And then there are other companies that don't go public, but that continue to be successful.
Yeah, and then obviously, even if you start with 10 companies and they were heavily vetted, you're still going to have some that don't end up where you thought they would end up. So some don't, don't succeed. But obviously, we're able to help anyone that joins us and try to accelerate their business beyond the phase they're in, which is usually the pre-investment stage, so the pre-seed stage.
So this is really important work that you're doing, especially now at this time when, given the pandemic. Next, let's switch gears and talk about Startup Week. And I know that you are the person in charge of healthcare. There's a track for healthcare at Startup Week. Tell us about Startup Week.
Yeah, Startup Week is an all-volunteer supported effort. In our case, we're in North Texas, in Dallas. So bringing together the startup ecosystem with all its different flavors. And that could be fashion, there's a fashion track, or an AI track, or a retail, or banking, you name it. There are about 20 tracks. One of them is healthcare, and that's really the only one I'm qualified to speak on. But anyway, what happens in each of those tracks, you get somebody who's a track leader or a track captain, and that's a volunteer in the community that ideally has a few connections. And that person, and sometimes it's several, I have a co-captain in my track, for instance, puts together the programming, and this is an all volunteer-driven event. So I know there was at least 1,300 people signed up for it already, and that number is growing every day. Of course, it's a free event. So anyone that has an interest in entrepreneurship will seek out the sessions that he or she likes. Takes place during that whole week, so it's next week, and then seek out what they want to learn, and can attend, obviously remotely this year.
Now, you say next week because we're recording this on Friday, but in fact, when this goes live, it'll be this week.
I called myself too late.
Yeah, that's okay.
Are you rolling in one piece, or are you going to do some editing?
One piece.
Okay, well then we'll stay on it.
Yeah. Now, and it's okay because our secret is out now. We're getting a head start. So it's free, you said. So that's a really good news. And it's virtual as well, right? So anyone can log on from just virtually anywhere.
Well, which brings up the question, why is it called Dallas Startup Week, right? What's the point? I mean, so there are programs like this exist in other locales, but if anybody can log on, then you can be anywhere, and presumably the advice you're getting should be applicable whether you're in Seattle or in Virginia.
But last year it was a live event, I assume. Is that correct?
Right. So it's still a live event, but it's all in person, of course. And the concept has morphed over the years. But in general terms, you will find events that are even simultaneously happening. You could almost think of a large conference, instead of in one conference center, all at the same time, 20 different flavors stretched out over a week and not in the same place. So different places. And so that's how the concept was born and how it has grown. But this year it's all virtual, so
it's
pretend to be in the Ritz.
It's a free event which helps any company, give any startup, any entrepreneur, give them food for thought, things to think about, probably some do's and don'ts. It must be a tremendously satisfying thing for you to do.
We love participating in it every year. It is quite a bit of work for all the volunteers. Actually, one of our sessions is exactly that, do's and don'ts, what I did wrong, what I did right. So 3 startup entrepreneurs speaking about their early stumbles and their early good decisions.
Right. Well, you're never too old to learn. No. And you're never too smart. Is there any particular person that you think would most benefit from this, or any person that's thinking about starting their own business?
Yeah, I think that as so often, it's difficult to decide where is your first touch point. Maybe you have this idea about an invention, maybe you have this idea about starting a business. Where do you go? I mean, as an accelerator, I know in many cases, one of the answers is go to one of the Health Wildcatters events. But here, this is really a lot more about any kind of entrepreneurship. And so if I were a student or a person thinking about starting something, this would be an easy way for me to learn things that are relevant to my business, that are in my community. So these are people that I can actually potentially have coffee with and learn more about, or bring them into my business, or maybe they're investors. So they're tangible potential parts of my futures. This is a very easy way to get going and to get to know some of the people that are involved actively in the startup community. So in your segment, you have a chance to get to know some of the right people.
What about companies that have been in business for 4 or 5 years? Is it valuable? Would be helpful to them?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, well, let's get with that one. It's very often a startup can be 4 or 5 years in the making. It's still not made it, right? So absolutely. But let's assume a company that has been successful. So number one, we have several such entrepreneurs who've at least made the first initial steps and been successful. Come back now and tell the story, right? So this is important, because when you're getting started and you think, oh, how do I get started? How can I ever be like this person? Well, here you get to meet someone who's done it just 3 years ahead of you. So it makes it more real. So we press them into service and say, you too can be a volunteer and you get to speak at one of these events. And so number one, they participate in that capacity. Number two, they're taking on additional staff. So there's, first of all, it's never a time, just like you said, where you know everything, right? So there's never a time when you shouldn't still be learning. So that's number one. Number two is they will take on entrepreneurial employees. And so it's often very helpful to tell them, hey, why don't you get to know some of the people in your ecosystem within the startup community in healthcare or retail or whatever it is, that might be valuable to you and good networking opportunities.
Okay, well, even though I've been in business for 21 years, I'm going to try to log on and see what I can learn, because, like I say, you're never too old to learn. So I think it's a great thing you're doing at an important time, and I take my hat off to you.
Well, thank you. It's we do it every year, and we very much wish we could do it in person, and we hope we can do it in person again next year. But the platform we're using will allow a whole bunch of different kinds of newer, to me anyway, ways to get to know others during that virtual event. So networking opportunities, which is a kind of the one void with all these virtual activities.
Okay, well, Dr. Zajicek, I want to thank you very much for joining us. It's very interesting. I'm lucky that I learned about you, and I hope that some of the people that watch this will sign on and learn as well.
We hope we get as many as we can, and it's an infinite resource, so come and join us.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you.